I now give the floor to those members of the Security Council who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Madam Chairman, we thank Dirk Polman and Jimmy Dore for their reports, which once again demonstrated to the Security Council that citizens of Western countries also have a huge number of questions for their governments amid numerous inconsistencies in the line promoted by Washington and its allies in connection with the bombing of the Nord Stream gas pipelines in September 2022. Dear colleagues, exactly a year has passed since the sabotage in the Baltic Sea. Almost the same amount of time has passed since the first meeting of the Security Council on this topic, over the past 12 months. We have heard a lot about how the national investigations carried out by Germany, Denmark and Sweden will very soon find the perpetrators of this crime. However, there were no results. And there are none. Despite 7 meetings of the UN Security Council, both open and closed, at the same time, more and more evidence is emerging in the expert community that the undermining of Nord Stream is the work of Washington, which committed this outrageous criminal act, guided by a narrowly selfish desire to consolidate its dominance in Europe, which is in dire need of Russian energy resources. Today's sad anniversary is a good opportunity to briefly restore the chronology of events. I will remind you of the main points. Already on September 28, immediately after the sabotage, the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation initiated the initiation of a criminal case under the Article Act of International Terrorism. Denmark and Sweden already indicated on September 29 in their letter to the UN Security Council that Nord Streams were destroyed by explosive devices. It seems that this was the only concrete conclusion we heard during all this time. However, the German Prosecutor General's office began its official investigation only on October 10. In October 2022, messages from the chairman of the government of the Russian Federation, Mikhail Mishustin, were sent to Berlin, Copenhagen and Stockholm on the need to conduct a comprehensive investigation of what happened with the participation of representatives of the Russian authorities and the Gazprom company. There have been no answers to them over the past year. In November, the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation sent requests to the German, Danish and Swedish competent authorities for legal assistance and the formation of joint investigative teams. In response, we received only formal replies. Members of the Security Council had the opportunity to see this with their own eyes. In March, we distributed copies of our correspondence with the authorities of the countries mentioned. Against the backdrop of this unacceptable situation, the Russian Federation submitted a draft resolution to the UN Security Council, asking the UN Secretary-General to submit proposals for the creation of an independent international commission to investigate sabotage. Tomorrow it will be exactly 6 months since the vote on this project. Its text was absolutely depoliticized. It took into account all the specific comments and proposals of members of the Security Council expressed by them during informal consultations. That lasted a whole month, however, was not accepted. Let me remind you that the main argument of those of our colleagues who abstained from voting was the so-called full confidence in the national investigations carried out by the authorities of Germany, Denmark and Sweden. But another 6 months have passed. But there are still no results. This is despite the fact that concern over the lack of any intelligible news from Berlin, Copenhagen and Stockholm for such a long time was expressed not only by Russia, China and Brazil, which spoke in March for an international investigation, but also by a number of other council members' security. Moreover, showing clear disrespect for the council, Germany, Denmark and Sweden ignored our request to speak at the UN Security Council meeting on July 11, limiting themselves to distributing another letter. Moreover, it very openly admitted that the ongoing investigations may not have any results at all. I would like to ask our colleagues who so zealously support these national investigations, what is the point of holding back the collective efforts of council members if those countries themselves have doubts about the effectiveness of the work they are doing? This all looks very much like a simulation of hectic activity and an attempt to deprive Security Council members of access to information directly related to the maintenance of international peace and security. Madam Chairman, I want to remind you that we are not talking about some hooligan prank. We are talking about a terrorist attack that affected the international pipeline infrastructure, which entailed severe economic and environmental consequences for a number of states. No one denies that it was committed with the help of an explosive device. Therefore, there is every reason to believe that it falls under the International Convention for the Suppression of Terrorist Bombings of December 15, 1997, to which Germany, Denmark and Sweden are parties. This international legal instrument clearly states the obligations of its parties to investigate relevant crimes, extradite or try criminals, and provide each other with maximum assistance in connection with investigations, prosecutions or extradition proceedings. The authorities of the three mentioned states continue to ignore these obligations. The words of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz about his intention to bring the matter to completion amid the lack of meaningful information are strikingly at odds with this very matter. Moreover, there are increasing signs that instead of efforts to identify the circumstances of what happened, we are actually faced with an attempt to conceal them. Thus, a coordinated campaign to promote completely ridiculous versions of what happened is growing in the Western media space. We've heard a lot over the past year. This is also the fact that Russia itself allegedly blew up a gas pipeline that was functioning in its interests. This is also the fact that this was done by some tourists on a sailing yacht who, according to one version, acted almost on their own initiative, without state support, and according to another version on the orders of the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine Zaluzhny, but in secret from his immediate supervisor President Zelensky. Even more ridiculous are the information published in some European media that the intelligence services of Western states, including the United States, were allegedly aware of the Ukrainians' plans and that they even dissuaded the Ukrainians from implementing them, but they still did it their own way. Using the example of the rejection of the peace treaty with Russia in March 2022, we know that the Kiev authorities cannot go against their Western curators on such a serious issue. Dear colleagues, it's hard not to notice what all these versions have in common. Each of them denies Washington's involvement in the commission of this crime. And they all began to grow like mushrooms shortly after a large-scale investigation by American journalist and Pulitzer Prize winner Seymour Hersh was published earlier this year, which was already mentioned by the speakers today. It presented a large number of facts indicating that explosives were installed on the Nord Stream gas pipelines by American divers during the NATO Baltops exercise in the summer of 2022. By the way, today he published a new batch of materials in support of this version. It follows from them that the explosion was carefully prepared for several months. They also thought about how they could cover their tracks after the terrorist attack. I recommend that all members of the Security Council carefully read its conclusions. We all also remember what was said today. These are the words of President Biden, that the United States will put an end to Nord Stream 2 during a press conference with German Chancellor Scholz on February 7, 2022. This is the undisguised joy of Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland due to the fact that the gas pipeline is now, in her words, a pile of metal on the seabed during hearings in the U.S. Senate on January 26, 2023. This includes gratitude to the United States for undermining Nord Streams, expressed on Twitter by former Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski. Let's not forget how some of the Western members of the Security Council, unable to control their emotions, directly pointed out at meetings that the undermining of Nord Streams was a response to Russia's actions in Ukraine. Such sincere confessions would allow even a novice investigator to complete this case without any problems. But since Germany, Denmark and Sweden are tasked with shielding the involvement of their overseas older brother, the investigators there have their hands tied and their eyes closed. Therefore, as the same Seymour Hersh told us, following the meeting between Joe Biden and Olaf Scholz, the American and German intelligence services were instructed to come up with an alternative version of events and gradually leak it to the media. As a matter of fact, this is what they are doing now. But they only come up with very implausible fabrications. And leaks about the real circumstances of the tragedy do not make the task easier for Western storytellers. In particular, we can recall the publicly available letter from the State Secretary of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Protection, Greichen, to the Bundestag deputy from the left Nasdaq Party, which is dated October 7, 2022. It follows from it that the German authorities, even before the start of the investigation, had some intelligence information they had received, the publication of which allegedly could harm the state interests of Germany. I wonder what information could cause damage to a country that seems to have suffered along with Russia. Be that as it may, this is yet another confirmation that Western investigators are not interested in the truth. It bothers them. Madam Chairman, so, what do we have now? A year after the terrorist attack, initially, there were threats from the top U.S. leadership regarding the functioning of the cross-border underwater gas pipeline. After this, it was undermined as a result of an act of international terrorism, which entailed dangerous consequences for international peace and security, the economy, the environment and shipping in the Baltic Sea. Then there was open rejoicing among senior representatives of the American and pro-American establishment. Resistance from Western countries to the idea of launching an impartial and inclusive international effort under the auspices of the UN Secretary-General. The obvious ineffectiveness of the German, Swedish and Danish national investigations. At the same time, the information background was being intensified in order to shift responsibility onto anyone other than the United States, in an attempt to contrast something with objective facts. In such a situation, I don't even want to say the cliché that draw your own conclusions. If anyone still has any illusions, then now, a year later, it's probably worth saying goodbye to them. Madam Chairman, I have no doubt that today we will again hear from Western colleagues that Russia is allegedly distracting the Security Council from more serious problems by insisting on discussing the terrorist attack against Nord Streams. Their tactics are simple and understandable. They drag out as long as they can, ideally for another year, or 2, or 3 years, and then state that the investigation is no longer possible after years have passed. We recommend that they not waste time and effort on this. All such attempts are obviously doomed to failure. Our country will continue to strive for an objective and thorough establishment of all the circumstances of what happened with the mandatory involvement of Russian investigative authorities and interested parties, as well as bringing to justice the customers and perpetrators of this sabotage. We will use all the means at our disposal for this, including at the Security Council. As part of this work, our country intends to submit a draft presidential statement on this topic for consideration by the Security Council. We will present its text in the coming days. We believe that the Security Council must speak out clearly regarding this terrorist attack and point out the need for an objective investigation and punishment of those who committed it. We count on the support of all those who understand that otherwise any country could become a victim of such an attack, carried out by a state intoxicated with its own sense of impunity. The Security Council should send a clear signal that crimes against cross-border pipeline infrastructure are unacceptable, and it will not be possible to avoid responsibility for them. Only this will prevent their recurrence. Thank you.